The retirement trap. Carl Jung reveals why you end up with nothing from the moment we enter the world. A storyline is quietly handed to us. It's not loud. It doesn't scream at you. It whispers. It's in the bedtime stories, the school lessons, the billboards, the way your parents talk about the future. It's the story of the linear life, one that moves from education to employment to retirement. And retirement, that's supposed to be the reward, the promised land, the finish line. It's where you finally get to stop running. But what if I told you that this story, this sacred, unquestioned arc, is a trap? What if Carl Jung, one of the deepest psychological thinkers of the modern age, could show us that by the time you reach that long-awaited stage of retirement, you may actually find yourself with nothing? Let's begin with the illusion. The entire idea of retirement rests on a deeply embedded belief that our lives are meant to be divided between duty and rest, labor and leisure, sacrifice and reward. We spend our prime years giving our energy to systems companies, institutions, economies under the assumption that one day those systems will give us back our time. But Jung would urge us to ask, what part of the self are you giving away in this transaction? And what happens when you finally get it back?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Jung believed that the first half of life is dominated by the construction of the ego, the building of an identity that can function in society. It's the time when we become workers, spouses, professionals, achievers. But the second half of life, he said, is supposed to be different. It's not about outer achievement anymore, it's about inner integration. It's about turning inward, confronting the shadow and uncovering the meaning behind all this doing. But society doesn't teach us this. It teaches us to accumulate, to perform, to delay our true life until after the job, after the kids leave, after retirement. And here's the trap. When you finally arrive at retirement, you're often left with a self you barely know. You've spent decades being productive, being responsible, being what the world expected. But you haven't spent decades being you. You haven't dug into the depths of your psyche. You haven't confronted the parts of yourself you buried for the sake of performance. You haven't asked the real questions. What does it mean to be alive? What is the purpose of suffering? What is the soul asking of me? And so, when the noise quiets and the structure dissolves, you find yourself face to face with your own emptiness. People don't talk about this enough, the existential vacuum of retirement. The way some people, after decades of chasing a finish line, arrive there and feel like strangers in their own skin. They wander through leisure like ghosts, restless in their supposed freedom, unsure of how to live now that there's nothing to do. Because the truth is, they were never taught how to just be. They were taught how to produce, how to earn, how to climb, but not how to descend into their own depths. Not how to listen to the soul's quiet voice, not how to meet themselves fully without distraction. So let's ask a dangerous question together. What if the way we structure life is backwards? What if retirement isn't a reward, but a reckoning? Jung didn't see aging as a decline. He saw it as a sacred opportunity. The second half of life, he said, is when we must confront the unconscious and bring it into harmony with the conscious mind. It's when we must stop living for the external world and start living from the internal center. But if you've spent your whole life ignoring that inner landscape, retirement won't feel like freedom. It will feel like exile. You'll be rich in time but poor in purpose, surrounded by silence but haunted by noise. This is why so many people after retirement fall into depression, anxiety, even illness, not because they're weak, but because they've lost the structure that gave them identity. They were never taught that identity could come from within. They were never taught that meaning isn't something you earn, it's something you uncover. And so they drift, untethered, looking for anchors in hobbies, routines, distractions. But those are surface-level solutions to a soul-level problem. Jung warned us about this. He said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." And maybe the greatest burden you'll bear is your own unlived life. The parts of yourself you left in the attic while you were busy being who you were supposed to be. And when the career ends and the calendar clears, you finally open that attic, and what stares back is not peace, but regret. So what's the solution? It's not to reject retirement. It's to redefine it, to stop seeing it as the end of life and start seeing it as a second birth, a return to the self. But that return can't begin at 65. It must begin now. You can't wait until society lets you stop working to start becoming who you really are. You must start peeling away the false selves now. You must start asking, what parts of me have I abandoned to survive? And can I reclaim them before it's too late? Because the truth is, the retirement trap isn't just about money or time. It's about meaning. And if you wait until the end to start looking for it, you may never find it. The unconscious debt, why the ego's chase for security destroys the soul's deepest desires. We live in a society that worships safety. Not just physical safety, but psychological security, stability, predictability. The promise of control over the chaos of life. And so from an early age we are taught to build a life around the ego's deepest craving, to be protected, to be approved of, to be in charge. But in chasing this illusion of control, we slowly mortgage our inner lives. We bury our wildness. We numb our intuition. We silence our soul's subtle voice. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He saw the ego not as the enemy, but as a necessary construction of the first half of life, a structure we need to survive, but one that must eventually be transcended if we are to truly live. The ego wants comfort. It wants clarity. It wants definitions and labels and guarantees. So it tells us to pursue the job that pays more, not the one that calls to our heart. It tells us to settle into relationships that look good on paper, not the ones that stretch us into wholeness. It tells us to save for retirement, to plan for the future, to build a fortress of logic around our lives so we never have to feel the terror of uncertainty. And yet, again and again, we find that this fortress becomes a prison. The more we fortify ourselves against pain, the more we close ourselves off from joy. The more we chase security, the more we lose connection to mystery. Here's where the trap tightens. The soul does not operate on the same terms as the ego. It doesn't care about your 401k. It doesn't care about what your LinkedIn profile says. The soul is not interested in reputation, in stability, in being seen as successful. The soul wants depth. It wants truth. It wants to be known, even in all its contradictions. And when we ignore it, when we live decades in service of the ego's agenda, we accumulate what Jung might call an unconscious debt. A backlog of unlived desires, unspoken truths, unfelt emotions. And sooner or later, that debt comes due. This is why so many people, even those who appear to have it all, wealth, status, admiration, reach midlife and feel a kind of spiritual bankruptcy. But it's not because life has failed them. It's because they've succeeded at the wrong things. They've built towers on the outside while their inner world has remained a wasteland. And when retirement comes, when the applause fades and the calendar empties, they suddenly hear, for the first time, the whisper of the soul. And it asks, "Where were you all these years?" But by then, it can feel too late. Not because it's ever truly too late, but because the longer we ignore the soul, the harder it becomes to hear it. But its language is not direct. It speaks in symbol, in dream, in yearning. It doesn't shout, it waits. And if we've spent decades tuning it out, we may mistake its call for anxiety or boredom or even depression. But beneath those symptoms is something deeper: the ache for authenticity, the hunger for meaning that no paycheck or pension can satisfy. So I ask you a question that has haunted me. What part of yourself have you sacrificed in the name of safety? And was that trade ever truly worth it? We're told to be practical, to be realistic, to play it safe. But safe for whom? For the ego? For the system? For the version of ourselves we thought we had to be? Jung would say that the soul doesn't care about safety. It cares about integration. It wants the full you, the messy, contradictory, passionate, fearful, creative, wounded, sacred you. And it will wait as long as it takes. The irony is that the very thing we're afraid of, uncertainty, is the only thing that can lead us back to ourselves. When we let go of control, even briefly, we open the door to the symbolic life, and to the possibility that life is not just a timeline, but a mythic journey. That our suffering has meaning, that our longings are not weaknesses, but guides, that our breakdowns are not endings, but initiations. Retirement, then, is not the end of the story, it's the moment where the real story could begin. But only if we've done the inner work, only if we've paid attention to the soul's quiet requests. Because if we haven't, we'll arrive at freedom with no idea what to do with it. We'll have time, but no purpose. Space, but no direction. Silence, but no inner voice to fill it. And so the real question is not whether you've saved enough money for retirement, but the real question is, have you saved enough of yourself? Beyond the clock, the myth of time, and why your true life doesn't begin at 65 time, is the great illusion we've all agreed to believe in. Not in the natural sense, sunrise and sunset, the turning of seasons, but in the linear, mechanical sense. The calendar, the retirement age, the milestones. We've carved life into segments and assigned meaning to numbers. 18 means adulthood, 30 means pressure, 65 means freedom. But Carl Jung would tell us that the soul doesn't move according to clocks or calendars. It doesn't recognize artificial deadlines. The soul unfolds in cycles, in spirals, in moments of awakening that defy predictability. So when we build our lives around the myth that fulfillment begins at some future age, typically after the labor of youth and the grind of midlife, we are postponing the very thing we came here to do, to live fully now. The trap is deep. We spend our best years waiting for life to start later. We tell ourselves, I'll travel when I retire, or I'll explore my creativity when the kids are grown, or I'll think about meaning when I have more time. But life doesn't wait. The soul doesn't wait, and meaning doesn't operate on layaway. If you postpone your true self long enough, you risk becoming a stranger to it. You can reach 65 with a full bank account and an empty heart. You can have leisure, but no inner compass, freedom, but no fire. Jung warned that when we neglect the inner life, we project our unlived potential outward. We chase new hobbies, buy new things, even reinvent our image, but none of it satisfies the deeper hunger. That's because the soul doesn't want novelty, it wants authenticity. It wants you to become who you really are, not just distract yourself with the trappings of newly acquired time. Retirement isn't a doorway into a new chapter unless your spirit is ready to walk through it. And if you've been spiritually asleep for decades, that door can feel like a wall. This is why, when people retire, they often feel disoriented. The structure of time that once defined them, deadlines, meetings, obligations, vanishes. And with it, their identity begins to unravel. But this unraveling isn't necessarily a crisis, it can be a calling. Jung believed that the second half of life is when we must turn inward, when our task is no longer survival or societal approval, but integration, to bring together the fragments of the self we've scattered over a lifetime, to retrieve the child we abandoned, the passions we buried, the truths we silenced. This work does not require a certain age. It requires willingness. It requires courage. So let me ask, what are you waiting for? What magical threshold are you hoping to cross before you finally give yourself permission to live honestly, creatively, soulfully? If not now, when? If you're waiting for the system to grant you freedom, you'll be waiting forever. Because freedom is not given, it's taken, it's claimed, it's created from within. We must stop outsourcing our lives to time, stop believing that age brings wisdom automatically. Wisdom only comes when we seek it, when we sit with our pain, when we challenge our assumptions, when we stop measuring life by productivity and start measuring it by presence. You don't have to wait until retirement to begin your real life. You can begin it the moment you choose to stop living on autopilot. Because the truth is, your true life doesn't begin at 65. It begins the moment you realize that time is not your master, it's your mirror. The final illusion, why the end of work isn't the beginning of freedom. We've been sold a myth so subtle, so pervasive, that we don't even recognize it as a myth. The story goes like this: work hard, stay disciplined, sacrifice your passions, delay your joy, and one day when the job ends, when the kids are grown, when the mortgage is paid, you will finally be free. But freedom isn't a destination. It's not something waiting for you at the end of a career. And this is where Carl Jung's wisdom cuts through the illusion with surgical clarity. Freedom is not the absence of work. It is the presence of meaning. You can stop working and still be in bondage to your unexamined fears, your unrealized dreams, your unhealed wounds. You can retire from the job, but not from the inner emptiness that comes from having lived someone else's life. And this is the final trap: believing that external freedom will automatically lead to internal liberation. It doesn't. It never has. Because the chains that matter most aren't on your wrists. They're in your mind. Jung understood that the psyche has its own rhythm, its own agenda. The ego's idea of freedom is comfort, but the soul's idea of freedom is truth. The soul doesn't care if you have free time, it wants you to use that time to become, to excavate the parts of yourself you abandoned in the name of performance, to confront the shadow, to tell the truth, to live from the inside out, not the outside in. And yet, many people reach retirement and feel more lost than ever. Why? Because they confused relief with liberation. Relief is what you feel when the pressure lifts. Liberation is what you feel when you finally meet yourself. One is temporary, the other is transformative. So I'll ask you this: if you had no job title, no accolades, no audience, who would you be? If no one was watching, what would you create? If there was no reward, would you still follow your curiosity? These questions are the beginning of true freedom. Not the kind that comes from escaping responsibility, but the kind that comes from embracing your essence. But retirement doesn't guarantee freedom. It only guarantees space. And what you do with that space will define not just your later years, but the legacy of your entire life. Will you fill it with distractions? Or will you finally do the work that matters most? The inner work, the soul work, the work of becoming whole. The truth is, you don't need to wait for retirement to start that journey. You can begin today, right now, not by quitting your job or escaping your obligations, but by turning inward, by asking the questions that scare you, by choosing, moment by moment, to live with depth instead of delay. Because the end of work isn't the beginning of freedom. The beginning of freedom is the end of pretending.